So, realized last video sort of jumped right into things, didn't really explain too much, but get into that a little bit more now. So, flax is something called a bast fiber. So, it comes from a plant, it's a very specific part of it, sort of that inner stem, but the way that you get that fiber is through a process called retting. What does retting sound like? Rotting. That's pretty much what you're doing. There are different ways to do it. Wholly submerging it in still water, like a pond or a tub, putting it in a river, which makes a little bit of a cleaner product. Does cause pollution, though, just from that process. There's also something called dew retting, which typically produces what was and sort of still is considered the highest grade of flax for making linen. But sort of part of that is making linen is very gross. It's a very gross process at the end of the day. So I had mentioned that when I'm spinning it, I just do spit. You know, this is for personal use. I know where this is from. I feel comfortable with that, not a problem. Some people will choose to just do plain water, and some people will even make some sort of a mix of, you know, chia seeds, that sort of gel, anything that's kind of tacky but'll wash away easily. Why do people do that? Well, very interesting, but a lot of bast fibers, flax specifically, they actually have a higher tensile strength when they are wet. This video isn't sponsored, I'm not affiliated, just want to shout out another great creator. I'll include a link to this video as well as her website, but Expertly Dyed has a really great video, sort of more going into the science of that. What does that mean for us as spinners? It means we can put a lot more twist into our singles, into our flax singles, when it is wet. You're going to make a stronger yarn, and it also helps sort of smoothing it down. Additionally, those retting processes, they're not perfect, and that's really only the very first step of processing flax into flax fiber, and eventually into linen. Might be sort of a old wives' tale, but it's also considered that sort of doing the spit part helps to just break down those enzymes, help to break down a little bit more of any of that stem part that might still be sticking to the fibers, and that's not what we want. So, you're probably going to see me readjust my wheel quite a bit. For some reason, switched around, started sliding, but story I'm going to be reading today to accompany this: The Stolen Bairn and the Sheep. Let's get started. There was a path that ran along near the edge of a cliff above the sea. And along this path, in the gloaming of a misty day, came two fairy women of the Sìdh. All of a sudden, both of them stopped and fixed their eyes on the path before them. There, in the middle of the path, lay a bundle. Though naught could be seen of what was in it, whatever it was moved feebly and made sounds of an odd, mewling sort. The two women of the Sìdh leaned over and pushed away the wrappings of the bundle to see what they had found. When they laid their eyes upon it, they both stood up and looked at each other. "'Tis a bairn," said the first of them. "'Tis a mortal bairn," said the other. Then they looked behind them, and there was nothing there but the empty moor with the empty path running through it. They turned about and looked before them, and saw no more than they had seen behind them. They looked to their left, and there was the rising moor again, with nothing there but the heather and gorse running up to the rim of the sky. And on their right was the edge of the cliff with the sea roaring below. Then the first woman of the Sìdh spoke, and she said what no one comes to be claiming is her own. And the second woman picked up the Bairn and happed it close under her shawl. Then the two of them made off along the path faster than they had come, and were soon out of sight. About the same time 2 fishermen came sailing in from the sea with their boat skirling along easy and safe away from the rocks. One of them looked up at the face of the black, steep cliff and let out a shout. "What's amiss?" asked the other. "I'm thinking someone's gone over the cliff," said the first man. "Do you not see?" The other one peered through the gloaming. "I see a bit of somewhat," said he. "Happen 'tis a bird." And we're just gonna weigh this down with "No bird is so big," said the first fisherman, and he laid his hand on the tiller of the boat. "You'll not be going in, the boat'll break up on the rocks," cried his companion. "Och, we'll not break up. Could I go home and eat my supper in peace, thinking that some poor body might be lying out here and him hurt or dying?" And he took the boat in. It came in safe, and they drew it above the waves. Up the cliff the two of them climbed, and there they found a young lass lying on a shelf of rock. They got her down and laid her in the boat, and off they sailed for home. When they got there, they gave her over to the women to nurse and tend. They found that she was not so much hurt as dazed and daft, but after 2 days she found her wits and looked up at them. "Where's my babe?" she cried then. "Fetch him to me." At that the women drew back and looked at one another, not knowing what to say, for surely they had no bairn to give her. At last, one old Cailleach went over to her and said, "Poor lass, call upon your Creator for strength. There was no bairn with you upon the cliff. Happen he fell from your arms to the sea." "That he did not," she cried impatiently. "I wrapped him warm and laid him safe on the path, while I went to search for water for him to drink. I did not have him with me when I fell. I must go find him." But they would not let her go, for she was still too weak from her fall over the cliff. They told her the men would go by the path and fetch the Bairn to her, so the men went, and they walked the path from one end to the other. But never a trace of the Bairn did they find. They searched the whole of the livelong day, and at night they came back and told her. They tried to comfort her as well as they could. He'd surely been found, they said, by a passer-by, and he'd be safe and sound in some good soul's home. They'd ask around, and so they did, but nobody had seen the child at all. She bided her time till her strength came back. Then she thanked kindly for all they'd done, and said she'd be going now to find her Bairn. He was all she had in the world, for his father was dead. The fisher folk would have had her remain with them. They'd long given up the child for dead, and they learned to love her well. "I'll come back and bide with you when I have my Bairn again," said she, "but until then, farewell." She wandered about from croft to croft and from village to village, but no one had seen him, or even so much as heard of anyone finding such a Bairn. At last, in her wandering, she came to a place where some travelers had made their camp. "Have you seen my Bairn?" she asked. For she knew they traveled far and wide, and she hoped that they might know where he was, but they could tell her nothing except that all the Bairns they had were their own. She was so forlorn and weary that they felt pity for her. They took her in and bathed her tired feet and fed her from their own pot. When they had heard her story, they said she must bide with them. At the end of the week, they'd be journeying north to meet others of their clan. They had an ancient grandmother there who had all the wisdom in the world. Perhaps she'd be able to help. So she stayed with the travelers and went northward with them. When they got there, they took her to the ancient grandmother and asked her to help the lass. "Sit thee down beside me," the old crone said, "and let me take thy hand." So the grieving lass sat down beside her, and there the two of them stayed, side by side and hand in hand. The hours went by, night came on, and when it was midnight, the ancient grandmother took her hand from the lass's hand. She took herbs from the basket which stood at her side and threw them on the fire. The fire leapt up, and the smoke that rose from the burning herbs swirled around the old traveler's head. She looked and listened as the fire burned hot. When it died down, she took the lass's hand again and fondled it, weeping sorrowfully the while. "Give up thy search, poor lass," said she. "For thy bairn has been stolen away by the sheep. They have taken him into the sheen, and what they take there seldom comes out again." The lass had heard tale of them. She knew that there were no other fairies so powerful as they. "Can you not give me a spell against them?" she begged, "to win my bairn back to me?" The ancient grandmother shook her head sadly. "My wisdom is only as ancient as man," she said, "but the wisdom of the she is older than the beginning of the world. No spell I have could help you against them." "Ah, then," said the lass, "if I cannot have my bairn back again, I must just lie down and die." "Nay," said the old woman, "a way may yet be found. Stay here a while, bide with my people to the day we part. By that time I may find a way to help you." When the day came for the travelers to part and go their separate ways, the old mother had sent for the lass again. "The time has come for the people of the Sìdh to gather together," said she. "Soon they will be coming from all their corners of the land to meet. There they will choose one amongst them to rule over for the next 100 years. If you can get into the sheen with them, there is a way that you may win back your bairn for yourself." "Tell me what I must do," said the lass eagerly. "For all their wisdom, the she have no art to make anything for themselves," said the old woman. "All that they get, they must either beg or steal. They have great vanity and desire always to possess a thing which has no equal. If you can find something that has not its like in all the world, you may be able to buy your bairn back with it." "But how can I find such a thing?" asked the lass. "And how can I get into the sheen?" "As for the first," the old grandmother said, "I am not able to tell you. As for the second, perhaps you might buy your way into the sheen as well." Then the old woman laid her hand on the lass's head, and blessed her and laid a spell upon her that might be safe from earth and air, fire and water, as she went on her way. And having done for all that she could, she sent her on her way. The travelers departed and scattered, but the lass stayed behind, poring over in her mind the things that she had been told. 'Twould be not one, but two things she must have. One would buy her into the sheen, and the other would buy her bairn out of it, and they must be rich and rare and beyond compare, with no equal in the world, or the she would set no value upon them. Where could a poor lass like herself find the likes of that? She couldn't think at all at first, because her mind was such a maze. But after a while, she set herself to remember all the things she'd ever been told of that folks spoke with wonder, and out of all of them, the rarest things that came to her mind were the white cloak of Necton and the golden stringed harp of Red, and suddenly her mind was clear, and she knew what she must do. Up she got and made her way to the sea. There she went up and down, clambering over sharp rocks, gathering soft white down shed from the breasts of the eider ducks that nested there. The rocks neither cut nor bruised her hands and feet, nor did the waves beat upon her with the rising tides. The heat of the sun did her no harm, and the gales and tempests held away from her and let her work in peace. True it was, the spell of the ancient grandmother protected her from earth and water, fire and air. Love sloppy drawing. When she had gathered all the down she needed, she sat herself down and wove a cloak of it so soft and white that one would have thought it a cloud she had caught from the sky. When the cloak was finished, she cut off her long golden hair. She put a strand of it aside, and with the rest she wove a border of golden flowers and fruits and leaves all around the edges of the cloak. I'm going to lower my tension just a tiny bit. Then she laid it under a bit of gorse. Off she went, hunting up and down the shore, seeking for something to make a frame of her harp. And she found the bones of some animal of the seas, cast upon the waves. They were bleached by the sun and smoothed by the tides till they looked like fine ivory. She bent them and bound them till she had a frame for the harp. Then she strung it with strings made from the strand of hair she had laid aside. She stretched them tight and set them in tune, and then she played upon it. The music of the harp was of such sweetness that birds lay motionless in the air to listen to it. She laid the cloak on her shoulders and took the harp on her arm and set off for the sheen. She travelled by high road and by road, by open way and by secret way, by daylight and by moonlight, until at last she came to the end of her journey. She hid herself in a thicket at the foot of the sheen. She could see the sheep people coming. The lass watched from behind the bushes as they walked by. They were a tall, dark people, with little in size or feature to show that they belonged to the fairy folk, except that their ears were long and narrow and pointed at the top, and their eyes and brows were set slantwise in their face. As the lass had hoped, one of the she came late, after all the rest had passed by into the sheen. The lass spread out the cloak to show it off at its best. She stepped out from the thicket and stood in the way of the fairy. The woman of the she stepped back and looked into her face. "You're not one of us," she cried angrily. "What is a mortal to do at a gathering of the she?" And then she saw the cloak. It flowed and rippled from the collar to the helm, and the gold of the border shone like sea waves shine with the sun upon them. The she woman grew silent, but her slanting eyes looked greedily over the cloak and grew bright at the sight of it. "What will you take for the cloak, mortal?" she cried. "Give it to me." "The cloak is not for sale," said the lass. Cunningly she swirled its folds so the light shimmered and played upon it, and the golden fruits and flowers glowed as if they had a life of their own. "Lay the cloak on the ground, and I'll cover it with shining gold, and you may have all of it, if you'll leave me the cloak," the fairy said. "Oh, the gold of the she cannot buy the cloak," said the lass, "but it has a price." "Tell me then," cried the she woman, dancing with impatience. "Whatever its price, you shall have it." "Take me with you into the sheen," cried the woman, "and you shall have the cloak," the lass said. But the lass wouldn't give the cloak up yet. She knew the she were a thieving race that will cheat you if ever they can. "Oh, nay," she said. "Before I give it to you, you must take me into the sheen. Then you may have it and welcome." So the fairy caught her hand and hurried her up the path. As soon as they were well within the sheen, the lass gave up the cloak. When the people of the sheen saw that a mortal had come among them, they rushed at her to thrust her out, but the lass stepped quickly behind the fairy who had brought her in. When the fairy people saw the cloak, they forgot the lass completely. They all crowded about the one who had it, reaching to touch it and begging to be let to try it on. The lass looked about her, and there, on a throne at the end of the hall, she saw the new king of the she. The lass walked through them unheeded and came up to him boldly, holding the harp up for him to see. "What have you there, mortal?" asked the king. "'Tis a harp," said the lass. "I have many a harp," said the king, showing but a little interest. "But never a one such as this," the lass said. And she took the harp upon her arm and plucked the golden strings with her fingers. From the harp there rose upon the air one note, filled with such wild love and longing, that all the Sìdh turned from the cloak to wonder at it. The king of the Sìdh stretched out both hands. "Give me the harp," he cried. "Nay," said the lass, "'tis mine." A crafty look came into the king's eyes, and he said idly, "Oh, well, keep it then, but let me try it to see if the notes are true." "Oh, they're true enough," said the lass. "I've set me in tune with my own hands. It needs no trying." Well, she knew that if he ever laid his hands upon it, she'd never get it back into her own. "Oh, well," said the king, "'tis only a harp after all. Still, I've taken a fancy to it. Name your price, and mayhaps we'll strike a bargain." "That I not say," said the lass. "I made the harp with my own hands, and strung it with my own golden hair. There's not another its like in all the world. I'm not liking to part with it at all." The king couldn't contain himself no longer. "Ask what you will," he cried. "Whatever you ask I'll give, but let me have the harp." And now she had him. "Then give me my bairn your women stole from the path along the black cliff by the sea," said the lass. The king of the Sìdh stood back in his throne. This was a price he did not want to pay. He had a mind to keep the bairn amongst them. So he had them bring gold and pour it in a great heap at her feet. "There is a fortune your king himself might envy," he said. "Take all of it and give me the harp." But she only said, "Give me my bairn." Then he had them add jewels to the heap, till she stood waist deep in them. "All this shall be yours," he tempted her. "'Tis a royal price for the harp." But she stood steadfast and never looked down at the jewels. "Give me my bairn," said she. When he saw that she would not be moved, he had to tell them to fetch the child for her. They brought the bairn, and he knew that his mother at once was there and held out his arms to her. But the king held him away from her and would not let her take him. "The harp first," said the king. "The bairn first," said the lass. And she would not let him lay a hand on the harp till she had what she wanted. So the king had to give in. And once she had the child safe in her arms, she gave up the harp. The king struck a chord upon it and began to play. The music that rose from the golden strings filled all the Sìdh with a music so wonderful that all the people of the Sìdh stood spellbound in their tracks to listen. So rapt were they that when the lass walked out of the Sìdh with her bairn in her arms, they never saw her go. So she left them there with the king on his throne, playing his harp, and all the people of the Sìdh standing still to listen. Maybe for the next 100 years, for all anyone knows. The lass took her bairn back to the fisher folk who had been kind to her as she had promised to do, and she and her bairn dwelt there happily for all the rest of their days. Well, that is our story. A little more about what I'm doing here at the wheel. I know I'm a little bit late in uploading. Still sort of working out how exactly we're going to want this channel to run. But, for those of you watching, I thank you and take care.